Bates family shock. Katie Bates and Travis Clark head for divorce. It started like a dream, the kind of love story that made people believe in forever. Katie Bates and Travis Clark were the couple that shined brighter than most. Their wedding was like a fairy tale, filled with laughter, songs, and promises whispered under soft white lights. Their smiles carried hope, a symbol of love, faith, and everything pure about a new beginning. When they welcomed their little girl, Haley, the world saw a perfect picture, a young mother glowing with love, a proud father holding his daughter close, and a family that seemed unshakable. Their photos captured happiness, their words spoke of faith, and their hearts appeared united. But what no one saw was the quiet distance growing behind those smiles. Late nights turned longer. Phone calls became shorter, and the love that once felt endless began to fade like a song slowly losing its tune. Katie tried to hold on. She filled the home with warmth, bedtime prayers with Haley, gentle music on the piano, waiting by the window when Travis came home late. But sometimes love begins to slip away without a sound. Sometimes it breaks softly, like glass under gentle rain. Travis's music career started taking him far from home. Studio sessions, tours, interviews. His world grew louder, while Katie's grew quieter. She missed him in moments that used to belong to both of them. Morning coffee, Sunday church, evening laughter that once echoed in every corner of their home. Behind closed doors, the silence began to speak louder than words ever could. The couple who once held hands during every storm, now stood in the same room yet miles apart. Katie would often look at her wedding ring, turning it slowly between her fingers, remembering the promises they made. And deep inside, she began to realize something painful. Forever doesn't always mean forever. Sometimes, two hearts still filled with love can grow in different directions. And sometimes, even the most faithful love story can reach a breaking point. Not in anger, but in quiet heartbreak. As the days passed, Katie's eyes lost their old sparkle. Her laughter, the one that used to fill every space, now sounded softer, weaker. Travis was still there, but not really there. The distance wasn't measured in miles anymore. It was emotional, invisible, and impossible to cross. Every night, when the house grew still, Katie would walk into Haley's room, kiss her tiny forehead and whisper, "Mommy's okay. Mommy's okay." But deep down she wasn't. And that's where their forever began to crumble. Not with shouting, not with betrayal, but with silence. A silence so heavy that even love couldn't carry it anymore. Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly became months. From the outside, everything still looked perfect. Photos still appeared on social media, smiles for the camera, captions filled with faith and love. But behind the screen, behind the filtered pictures, the truth was heavy and heartbreakingly real. Katie woke up every morning to the same routine: warm sunlight, a quiet home, and a phone that stayed silent. Travis was somewhere far away, chasing the music that once brought them together. She used to love watching him sing, his voice full of passion and promise. Now she could barely listen to his songs. Every lyric felt like a goodbye she never heard. Their conversations had become mechanical. "How are you?" "I'm fine." "How's Haley?" "She's good." No laughter. No warmth. Just the kind of small talk two strangers share when they've run out of words that matter. Katie tried to hold on. She planned date nights that never happened. She left notes on his desk, little reminders that said, "I miss you and come home early tonight." But those notes stayed unread, buried under papers, lost under the noise of a career that demanded all of him. Sometimes she'd hear his voice in another city, performing, smiling, surrounded by lights and people. She would stand in the living room, holding their daughter, and whisper softly, "Do you still think of us when the crowd sings your name?" Travis loved them. He always did. But the world around him was changing too fast. Music was his dream. And somewhere along the way, that dream started to pull him away from the life he'd built with Katie. He didn't notice how her eyes began to look tired. He didn't hear the sound of her breaking heart because the applause was too loud. Nights grew longer for Katie. When Haley finally fell asleep, she'd sit by the window, staring into the quiet street, waiting for headlights that never came. Sometimes she'd cry silently, pressing her hand against her chest as if trying to keep herself from falling apart. She'd whisper to the night, "I'm still here, Travis. I'm still trying. But love isn't always enough when two people stop reaching for each other. There were no big fights, no cruel words. Only small, unnoticed moments that tore them apart. Missed dinners. Forgotten birthdays. The way he'd scroll through his phone instead of meeting her eyes. The love that once lit up their home now flickered like a candle struggling against the wind. And yet, Katie refused to hate him. She still prayed for him every night, still believed that maybe, somehow, God would bring him back home. Not just to their house, but to her heart. But as weeks turned into months, she began to feel something she'd never felt before. Emptiness. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just the quiet understanding that sometimes, no matter how much you love someone, they might not stay. In that silence, surrounded by baby toys and unfinished lullabies, Katie finally realized. She was living with someone who wasn't really there anymore. And the hardest part wasn't losing him, it was pretending she hadn't already lost him long ago. There's always that one moment, the quiet second when love finally breaks. Not in shouting, not in anger, but in silence. For Katie, that moment came one cold evening. Haley had just fallen asleep. The house was dark except for the glow of a single lamp in the corner. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, the screen still showing read 4 hours ago. She had sent Travis a message earlier. We miss you. Can you come home soon? But there was no reply. It wasn't the first time. But that night the emptiness felt different. Heavier, final. She looked around the room. The dinner she'd cooked hours ago had gone cold. The walls felt too quiet, too wide. Every corner carried memories, laughter, songs, plans that were now fading into ghosts. Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't stop. For months, she had been holding on, hoping, praying, believing that maybe tomorrow would be better. But tonight, something inside her finally whispered, "It's over, Katie. You can't fix this alone anymore." That night, she called her mom. Kelly Jo's voice on the other end was soft, calm, the voice that had always made things better. But when she heard her daughter's trembling breath, she didn't need to ask what was wrong. "Katie." There was silence. Then a quiet sob. And finally, the words that broke both their hearts. "Mom, I think Travis doesn't love me anymore." The next morning, Katie packed a small bag for Haley and drove to Tennessee. No music in the car. No phone calls. Just miles of empty road, and the sound of her own heart breaking with every turn. When she reached home, Kelly Jo opened the door and pulled her into her arms. Katie couldn't hold it anymore. The tears came rushing out like a storm she'd kept locked away. All those months of pretending to be okay finally spilled out. "I tried, Mom. I really did. I prayed every night. I kept believing it would get better. But I don't think he wants this anymore." Kelly Jo held her tighter, whispering through her own tears. "You don't have to carry this alone, sweetheart. Sometimes love changes. And that's not your fault." In another city, Travis sat alone in his studio. His guitar was silent, untouched for days. The walls that once echoed with music now felt empty. He scrolled through old photos, their wedding day, Katie laughing under fairy lights, holding baby Haley for the first time. And for the first time in months, the reality hit him like a wave. He had lost her. Not because of one fight, but because he stopped showing up when she needed him most. He whispered to himself, voice breaking, "What have I done?" But by then Katie was gone. Not out of anger. Not out of hate. She just couldn't keep fighting for two anymore. Days later, the calls from Travis came, but she didn't answer. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew love wasn't supposed to hurt this way. She started to understand something she never wanted to believe. Sometimes, love isn't enough when two hearts stop meeting halfway. Sometimes, even good people lose each other. And as she watched Haley sleeping peacefully that night, Katie whispered through her tears, "I'll keep going, baby. For you. Even if I have to do it alone." That's how it happens. Not with loud endings, but with quiet realizations. When you finally see that holding on is hurting more than letting go. And in that moment, the story that once felt unbreakable finally reaches its breaking point. It's strange how the world doesn't stop when your heart does. People still laugh. Cars still pass by. The sun still rises. But for Katie, everything felt frozen. caught between what was and what would never be again. Weeks passed since she left. Travis called, texted, even drove to Tennessee once. But every time he saw her, words failed him. They stood in the same room, two people who used to be one, now unable to even look into each other's eyes for too long. There were no fights, no screaming, just sadness. The kind of sadness that wraps itself around silence and refuses to let go. Katie sat across from him one afternoon, her hands trembling as she tried to speak. Haley was with Kelly Jo in the next room, unaware that her parents were about to rewrite her story forever. "Travis," she said softly, her voice breaking, "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that we're okay." He looked at her, eyes full of regret. There was so much he wanted to say, 1,000 apologies, 1,000 what-ifs. But all that came out was a whisper. "I never wanted to lose you." Katie's eyes filled with tears. "Then why didn't you fight for me when you still had the chance?" The room went quiet again. Just two hearts, both broken, both tired. That day, they decided it was time. No lawyers. No shouting. Just a decision made with the kind of pain that only comes from love that once ran deep. When the divorce papers came, Katie stared at them for a long time. Every word on the page felt heavier than the next. Dissolution, separation, agreement. Words that sounded so cold, so far from what they once were. She held the pen tightly, her hand shaking. Haley's little picture sat on the table beside her, smiling, innocent, untouched by the storm swirling around her parents. Katie took a deep breath and signed her name. Tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly, a mark of everything she had given, everything she was losing. Travis signed his copy quietly, his eyes wet but distant. In that moment, both of them realized, this wasn't anger, this wasn't revenge. It was surrender. The acceptance that sometimes, even love can't fix what's already broken. When Katie stepped outside, the air felt colder than usual. The street was empty, the world too quiet. She stood there for a moment, clutching the signed papers to her chest, and whispered through the ache, "This isn't how forever was supposed to end." She drove home with Haley asleep in the back seat. Every mile felt heavier than the last. But as she looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror, she knew she couldn't fall apart. Not now. For Haley, she had to stay strong. She had to rebuild her world piece by piece, even if it meant doing it alone. Back in New Jersey, Travis walked into their old house, now half empty. The piano was covered with dust. The walls, once filled with laughter, now echoed with memories. He sat down on the floor, holding his guitar, but the music wouldn't come. Every chord felt wrong. Every note carried too much pain. He buried his face in his hands and whispered, "I'm sorry, Katie. I'm sorry for all the times I wasn't there." But she couldn't hear him anymore. Those words had come too late. Katie, meanwhile, sat by her window that night, watching the moon through the quiet Tennessee sky. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She was just empty. The kind of empty that comes when love finally leaves, and you have no choice but to keep breathing without it. She touched her wedding ring one last time, then quietly slipped it off her finger. She placed it in a small wooden box, next to the photos, the letters, and a small piece of the life she once had. And as she closed the box, a single tear ran down her cheek. Not of regret, but of release. That night, she whispered a prayer. Not for the marriage to come back, but for peace. "God, if this is the end, please help me find a new beginning." And somewhere miles away, Travis whispered his own prayer too. "If I can't have her, let me at least learn how to love better." Two hearts. Two prayers. One ending. And just like that, a story that began with music and faith came to its quiet close, not with a scream, but with a sigh. Because sometimes love doesn't break all at once, it fades slowly, until one day, it's simply gone. The days after the divorce felt unreal. Katie would wake up sometimes forgetting she was alone, her hand reaching across the bed, searching for warmth that wasn't there anymore. The house was quieter now. No guitar in the living room, no footsteps in the hallway. Just her and Haley. And the sound of a new life slowly trying to find its rhythm again. She started small. Morning walks with Haley, cooking breakfast together, reading scripture aloud, even when her voice trembled. And in those quiet moments, She began to rediscover something she thought she had lost, herself. At night, when Haley fell asleep, Katie would sit by the window with her journal. She didn't write about love or loss anymore. She wrote about strength, grace, and the peace that comes after pain. She wrote letters she never sent. To Travis, to her past self, to the girl who once believed forever meant perfect. "I forgive you," one of her letters said. "Not because it was easy, but because I need to breathe again." Some days were harder. There were mornings she couldn't get out of bed. Moments when a song on the radio or a memory in a photograph would break her all over again. But she kept going, for Haley, and for the version of herself who deserved to feel whole again. Her family stood by her quietly. Kelly Jo would drop by often, helping with Haley bringing food, reminding her that even in the darkest valley, she wasn't walking alone. Erin would call every evening, her voice soft and full of warmth, talking about motherhood, faith, and how God can still rebuild what's been shattered. Slowly, Katie began to smile again. Not the kind of smile you wear to hide the pain, but the kind that comes when you start to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst is behind you. Meanwhile, miles away in New Jersey, Travis was fighting his own battle. His songs didn't sound the same anymore. He tried to sing about love, but the words tasted hollow. He'd look at old photos, Katie laughing, Haley's tiny hands, and realize what he had lost wasn't just a marriage. It was peace. It was home. He started showing up to church more often, sitting quietly in the back pew, listening instead of performing. One Sunday, as the choir sang, he closed his eyes and whispered a prayer he hadn't said in months. "Lord, teach me to love the way you do, selflessly." And that was the first time he didn't feel lost anymore. He knew he couldn't fix the past, but maybe he could learn from it. Back in Tennessee, Katie was building something new. She started a small online blog, writing about motherhood, faith, and heartbreak. She didn't mention names, didn't tell stories to blame. She wrote to heal, for herself and for the women who read her words and whispered, "Me too." Her posts began to spread quietly. People called her words honest, raw, beautifully broken. And for the first time since the divorce, she felt like her pain had a purpose. One evening, she took Haley to the park. The sunset painted the sky gold, and laughter filled the air. Haley ran ahead, her little hands reaching for butterflies, her giggles echoing like tiny bells. Katie stood there for a moment, watching her daughter, and felt something she hadn't felt in months, peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from forgetting. It was the peace that comes from surviving. Later that night, she tucked Haley into bed and whispered, "Mommy's okay now, baby. We're okay." Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, carrying away the last traces of heartbreak. Katie walked to her window again, the same one she once cried beside, and this time she smiled. Somewhere, she hoped Travis had found his peace too. Not because she wanted him back, but because love, even when it ends, shouldn't turn into bitterness. It should teach you something. And maybe that was the real ending to their story. Not the divorce, not the pain, but the lesson that sometimes, love's purpose isn't to last forever. It's to change you. Katie wasn't the same girl she once was. She was softer now, wiser, and stronger in ways she never thought possible. Her heart still carried scars, but they no longer hurt. They told a story. A story of love, loss, and faith. A story of a woman who walked through the fire and came out whole. As the night deepened, Katie closed her eyes and whispered one final prayer, not of sadness but of gratitude. "Thank you, God, for breaking me in ways that led me back to you." And with that, she turned off the light, kissed her daughter good night, and finally slept, peacefully, deeply, and without tears. Years had passed since the divorce. The quiet ache that once defined Katie's days had softened into something gentler. A rhythm of life rebuilt piece by piece. She was no longer the woman who woke up every morning searching for a love that was gone. She was stronger, calmer, carrying a peace that only time, faith, and perseverance could teach. Travis had changed too. The music that once drove him away now became a bridge back to himself. He had learned to sing not for the applause, not for fame, but for meaning. And somewhere in that journey, he had learned the hardest lesson, that love, no matter how deep, sometimes isn't enough. Fate, or perhaps grace, brought them together one afternoon. It was a neutral place, a small community event in Tennessee, a park where families gathered for a charity fair. Neither expected it. Yet when Katie looked up from Haley's hand, there he was, Travis, older, quieter, carrying a gentle weight of reflection in his eyes. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The air between them was filled with memories, laughter, tears, sleepless nights, and whispered promises. It could have been awkward, painful, or tense. But instead it was quiet. Travis stepped forward, his voice soft, careful. "Katie." She turned fully, meeting his eyes. No anger. No resentment. Just understanding. "Hi, Travis," she said. They talked, cautiously, respectfully, honestly. Not about rekindling, not about what went wrong, but about acknowledgement. About the love that had been real, and the lessons it had left behind. "I'm sorry," Travis whispered. "Not for leaving, but for all the times I wasn't really there when you needed me." Katie smiled softly, eyes glistening with tears, and placed a hand on her heart. "I forgive you. Not because it's easy, but because I had to. And I hope you've found your peace too." They stood there, two people who had once been one, now carrying their love differently, not as a marriage, not as a romance, but as a story that had shaped them. Haley tugged at Katie's hand, and Katie bent down to her daughter's height, laughing softly as Haley pointed at a butterfly. Travis watched, quietly smiling, feeling the warmth of the family he had helped create but no longer owned. In that moment, the world felt right again. Not perfect. Not what it once was. But enough. Katie whispered to herself. Love isn't about holding on forever. Sometimes it's about letting go, and still keeping the good in your heart. Travis nodded, a single tear falling down his cheek. He whispered a prayer under his breath, echoing hers. "Thank you for letting us find grace, even after goodbye." The sun began to set, painting the sky with gold and pink. Katie, Haley, and Travis stood together for a fleeting moment. A moment that was neither a beginning nor an end, but a reminder of life's most important lesson. Even broken love can leave something beautiful behind. And as they parted ways that evening, neither turned back. Because they had already arrived, at forgiveness, at peace, and at a new chapter in their lives. The camera pans up, the sky glowing with the last light of day. And in that golden quiet, the story ends, softly, beautifully, and with hope. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Years had passed since the divorce, yet the echoes of what once was still lingered. The laughter, the music, the whispered promises that had faded into memories. Katie Bates walked slowly into Haley's room, brushing her daughter's hair back gently. "Mommy's here, sweetheart. Always." Haley's eyes sparkled with innocence, unaware of the storms that had passed, unaware of the heartbreak that had shaped the woman holding her. Katie bent down, pressing a soft kiss to Haley's forehead, and for the first time in a long while she felt whole. Not perfect. Not the life she had imagined, but hers, rebuilt from the fragments of love, pain, and faith. Somewhere in another state, Travis Clark sat alone in his studio. The guitar rested on his lap, fingers hovering over strings he hadn't touched in months. He had learned the hardest lesson, that love sometimes isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go and carrying the memories gently in your heart. Fate, in its quiet way, brought them together one afternoon. A charity fair, a park filled with laughter, and the soft hum of life moving forward. Katie held Haley's hand as they walked past. When she saw him, Travis standing there, older, quieter, carrying years of reflection in his eyes. Time froze. Not with tension or anger, but with recognition. Two souls who had loved deeply, hurt deeply, and now were meeting not as lovers, but as people who had survived together and apart. "Katie." Travis's voice was soft, trembling slightly. Katie looked at him, her chest tightening but her voice calm. "Hi, Travis." They didn't speak of the past, not in detail. They didn't speak of what went wrong, or who was right. They spoke of peace, of forgiveness, of gratitude for the lessons love had left behind. "I'm sorry," Travis said, tears welling. "Not for leaving, but for the moments I wasn't truly there." Katie's eyes glistened. "I forgive you, and I hope you found your peace too." Haley tugged at Katie's hand, giggling at a butterfly. Katie laughed softly, brushing her daughter's hair, and Travis watched. For the first time, he smiled freely, letting go of guilt, of longing, of what could have been. They stood together for a fleeting moment, a mother, her daughter, and the father who had loved them. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a second chance. It was closure. It was the purest form of love. The one that survives even when hearts part ways. Katie whispered under her breath. Love isn't always forever. Sometimes it's about letting go, and still keeping the good in your heart. Travis nodded silently, a single tear tracing down his cheek. Thank you for letting me learn that. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky gold and rose. Katie held Haley close. Travis took a step back, letting them walk ahead. And in that quiet golden light, the story ended. Not with heartbreak, not with anger, but with grace, with forgiveness, with hope. Sometimes the most emotional endings aren't about holding on. They're about finding the light after saying goodbye.